In the heart of a relentless blizzard, the Turner family discovers a wild Mustang, frozen and near death, tethered to a tree in the Colorado Rockies. Against all odds, they haul the ailing horse back to their ranch, nursing her back to health and forging an unbreakable bond with a majestic creature, whom they name Aurora. When spring arrives, they make the bittersweet decision to release her into the wild, believing that their chapter with Aurora has ended. Yet what unfolds next with their daughter remains a secret no one could have foreseen, one that will leave you speechless. Watch the full story to uncover the incredible twist that changes everything. Before we dive into the full account, let us know in the comments where you're watching or listening from, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Your support motivates us to share more impactful stories. Outside, the wind roared like a wild beast around the Turner cabin, rattling wooden shutters and sending waves of snow tumbling against the walls. The Colorado Rockies were gripped by a brutal blizzard, the kind that seemed to devour the world in white. Inside the small yet sturdy log cabin, the Turner family huddled around the flickering warmth of a stone fireplace, the air thick with the crackle of burning wood and unspoken tension. Clara Turner sat on a worn rug near the fire, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She was 12 years old, with pale freckled skin and wide, expressive green eyes that took in every detail. Her thick, reddish-brown hair cascaded in unruly waves over her shoulders, and her small hands absently traced patterns on the soft fabric of her oversized sweater. Her boots lay kicked off near the door, still wet from earlier chores. Clara's silence filled the room as it always did. She had not spoken a word since the day she was born. Her father, Tom Turner, stood at the window, his rugged features illuminated by the faint glow of the storm outside. His short, graying hair was tousled, and his heavy work shirt and jeans were dusted with sawdust from the morning's repairs. Beside him, Mary Turner, Clara's mother, nervously wrung her hands. Her honey-blonde hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her soft blue eyes darted between her husband and the raging storm. She wore a wool cardigan over a long skirt and sturdy leather boots that tapped softly on the wooden floor as she shifted her weight. Then, Tom's voice cut through the wind's roar. "It's getting worse out there. We'll need to check the barn soon so the animals won't perish if the snow pile's too high." Mary nodded, but her gaze settled on Clara, sitting so still and quiet by the fire. There was always a heaviness in the air when they looked at her, a mix of love and worry born from years of trying to understand a daughter who could not express her feelings. For a moment, Clara met her mother's gaze before turning back to the fire, her green eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Suddenly, a loud, desperate sound pierced the storm, a faint yet unmistakable cry. Clara's head snapped up, her heart thudding in her chest. She looked to her parents, eyes wide with urgency. Tom frowned, instinctively reaching for his heavy coat. "What was that?" he asked, though he already knew it was the sound of a horse in distress. "I'll come with you," Mary said, grabbing her scarf, but Clara was already on her feet, her hands moving in swift, deliberate gestures. "Let me go, I'll find it." Tom hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "Clara, no, it's too dangerous. You'll get lost in the storm." Clara shook her head fiercely, her hands moving again. "I know this land better than anyone. You need to stay with Mom." "I'll go," she insisted. The room fell silent. Tom's lips tightened, knowing his daughter's determination was unshakable. In moments like these, her silent resolve communicated more clearly than words ever could. "Fine," he said at last, "but take the lantern and whistle if you're in trouble. No exceptions." Clara nodded, pulling on her coat and boots. Mary handed her the lantern, eyes brimming with worry. "Be careful," she whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair from Clara's face. Clara stepped out into the storm, the cold biting at her cheeks and the snow crunching under her boots. The lantern's light barely pierced the swirling white, but she pressed on, following the faint sound of a distressed horse. Her heart pounded as she trudged through the drifts, the icy wind whipping at her face. Shielding her face from the gusts, she squinted through the falling snow. Suddenly, a shape bloomed ahead, dark and motionless against the endless white. As she approached, her heart sank. There, in the midst of the storm, stood a wild horse. The Mustang stood tied to a tree with a coarse rope biting into its neck. Its chestnut coat was matted with clinging snow and ice, and its legs trembled beneath its weight. The animal appeared gaunt, its ribs clearly visible under its skin and its head drooping in exhaustion. Clara stopped a few feet away, her heart pounding. This Mustang wasn't here by accident. Someone had tethered it and left it to perish. The rope's knot was rough and cruel, tightened mercilessly as if to ensure the horse could never break free. But why? And who could commit such heartlessness? She advanced slowly, her green eyes wide with both fear and compassion. The horse lifted its head slightly, its dark eyes locking with hers. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze in the depths of that gaze. In those eyes, Clara saw something ineffable, a mirror of her own silence, her inner struggle to be understood. The horse flinched as she stepped closer, its nostrils flaring in apprehension. Clara paused, raising her hands in a soothing gesture. "It's okay," she thought, willing her message to reach the creature. "I'm here to help." She set the lantern down and withdrew a knife from her pocket, her hands trembling as she worked to sever the rope that bit into the horse's neck. The animal shifted uneasily, yet it did not pull away. Clara's movements were careful and deliberate. In her mind, she spoke to the horse as she always had with animals. "You are not alone. You don't have to fight anymore." Finally, the rope loosened and fell away, and the horse staggered, nearly collapsing. Clara moved nearer, her hand brushing gently against its neck. The animal did not resist. Its trembling slowly subsided as if it understood that the small, silent girl meant no harm. The wind roared around them, but Clara did not notice as she placed a gentle hand on the horse's shoulder, her green eyes meeting its dark ones. In that moment, she felt something shift, a deep, inexplicable connection that filled the silence within her with something new. Just then, the door to the cabin burst open and Clara stumbled inside, clutching the icy metal handle of the lantern. The warm light from the fireplace spilled across the room but could not reach the trembling figure behind her. "Tom, Mary, help me!" her father called out, rushing forward with strong arms that grabbed the makeshift restraints Clara had fashioned from the knotted rope she'd cut from the Mustang's neck. The horse bolted at the sudden shift of light and sound, rearing slightly and straining against the reins. Clara dropped the lantern and stepped back, her wide green eyes fixed on the animal as her breath emerged in short, white clouds. Her body shook as much from adrenaline as from the cold. In seconds, Mary was by Clara's side, wrapping her in a heavy woolen blanket. "Clara, are you all right?" she whispered, kneeling to peer into her daughter's eyes. Clara nodded weakly, urgently gesturing toward the horse. "Help, she's hurt." Tom gripped the reins firmly, murmuring softly as he inched closer to the Mustang. The horse snorted, its dark eyes were wild with fear, its chestnut coat flecked with frost and ice, its legs trembling and its sides heaving with each shallow breath. "Easy, girl," Tom muttered in a low, even tone, "we're not going to hurt you." Clara stood frozen in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Her mind raced as she noted that the Mustang had followed her through the storm, its trust fragile yet now on the brink of collapse. She felt a deep pang in her chest. "She's like me," Clara thought, her hands gripping the edges of the blanket, caring yet stranded in a world that fails to understand. Mary's voice broke through her thoughts. "Tom, we need to get her warm. She won't last like this." Tom nodded, his grip unyielding. "Help me clear a space in the barn," he said. "We can't keep her here. She needs room to move." The barn was a shadowy haven, its walls groaning softly under the weight of the wind outside. Tom led the Mustang inside, her hooves dragging slightly on the packed dirt floor, and tied her to a sturdy post in the center, careful to leave enough slack for her to shift. The horse lowered her head, her body sagging with exhaustion. Clara followed closely, her small frame dwarfed by the barn's towering beams, and moved to the corner where the hay was kept. She grabbed armfuls and spread them in a wide circle around the Mustang. Her parents exchanged worried glances but said nothing as Clara worked, her gestures deliberate and determined. "She needs water," Mary said, turning toward the house. "I'll fetch some warm broth for her." "I'll check her legs," Tom added, kneeling beside the horse and running his hands gently down her legs, searching for any breaks or swelling. The Mustang flinched but did not fight. Nothing was broken. After a long, heavy pause, a voice broke the silence with a grim tone. "She's been through hell. It's nothing short of a miracle she's made it this far." Clara knelt reverently by the battered head of the Mustang, her every movement slow, deliberate, and tender. The animal's dark, soulful eyes flickered toward her, cautious yet curious, while Clara, with her small hand outstretched and palm up, waited in quiet invitation. She neither moved nor uttered a word, allowing the Mustang to decide its own pace. Minutes slipped by in that suspended moment until, hesitantly, the Mustang stretched its long neck forward. Its nostrils flared as it took in Clara's gentle scent. In that fragile instant, a spark of connection ignited between them, a bond as delicate as glass yet undeniable in its strength. A small, breathless smile played on Clara's lips, for she needed no words to understand what the horse was silently saying. I do not trust you yet, but I will let you try. Hours later, the atmosphere within the barn had grown quiet, the storm outside easing as the relentless howling wind gave way to the steady rhythm of snow falling from the roof. The Mustang now lay peacefully on a soft bed of hay while Clara's breathing had settled into a slow, measured cadence. Her frostbitten ears twitched ever so occasionally, and although her muscles still carried the tension of residual fear, she sat cross-legged a few feet away, wrapped in a thick blanket that lent her a semblance of warmth. With a mixture of awe and sorrow, her green eyes traced every scar that marred the Mustang's chestnut coat, the cruel, rough knot of rope having left an angry red mark, with patches of fur missing along its flanks. Echoes of her father's earlier words reverberated in her mind, words that reminded her how utterly the horse had suffered in that merciless storm. Clara wondered, with clenched fists and a heart awash with anger and sadness, how much the creature had endured before being abandoned. It wasn't fair for the horse, nor for anyone who had ever felt such profound neglect. Yet, amid the sorrow, something else stirred in Clara's chest. It was reminiscent of the quiet, determined feeling she had experienced when her father taught her to bottle-feed a fragile, orphaned lamb, or when her mother patiently showed her how to coax a terrified barn cat from its hiding place. That same steadfast determination now whispered through her being, "You are not alone anymore. I will take care of you." With that resolve, Clara reached for the small chalkboard she always carried for moments when gestures could not suffice. Carefully, with deliberate precision born of her inner strength, she wrote a single word and held it up for her parents, who had just returned to the barn to check on the struggling horse. The chalkboard bore the name, Aurora. Mary tilted her head, her tone warm yet laced with curiosity as she asked, "Aurora? Why, Aurora?" In response, Clara pointed first to the Mustang and then to the faint glow of dawn breaking through the barn's small window, as if to say, "Because she is the light after the storm." Tom, watching the silent exchange, offered a faint, approving smile and a slow nod, an acknowledgment of the significance that word carried. In that barn, still redolent with the scent of hay and the lingering warmth that contrasted starkly with the storm's cold, sterile bite, Aurora lay in repose while Clara's chest rose and fell slowly. Her body, though still stiff from the ordeal, no longer trembled as fiercely. Outside, snow was piled high, muffling the usual morning sounds of the Turner Ranch. Clara, seated cross-legged near Aurora with a chalkboard balanced on her lap, noticed that the word Aurora was still faintly visible, yet now her hands had found a new purpose. With careful strokes, she sketched the outline of the Mustang on the board, her chalk moving with focus and care. Aurora had captivated her heart, and through drawing, Clara was able to sort the tumultuous mix of emotions swirling inside her. Occasionally, she glanced up at the horse, her green eyes soft with wonder. Aurora shifted her ears, flicking them back as Tom entered the barn. In that moment, the Mustang's muscles tensed, and her nostrils flared, yet she made no attempt to rise. Quick to reassure, Clara held up her hands in a calm and deliberate gesture, silently declaring, "It's okay, he won't hurt you." Tom knelt beside her, gently brushing the snow off his coat as he set a bucket of warm water on the ground. "She's watching everything we do," he murmured slowly, his eyes fixed on Aurora as if trying to decipher the Mustang's inner thoughts. "You see, yes, she's trying to figure out if we're friend or foe." Clara nodded, her gaze never leaving Aurora. The Mustang's dark eyes darted between them, the faint white at the edges betraying a lingering fear but also a spark of something else, curiosity. Perhaps Clara understood that same wary curiosity that she felt when encountering new people, unsure of their intentions yet yearning to connect. Tom then handed Clara a damp cloth and said, "Start wiping her down slowly and steadily. She needs to feel your touch if we're to help her." Clara hesitated only for a moment before edging closer to Aurora. At her approach, the horse stiffened, and Clara's breath quickened as she paused, her hand hovering just above Aurora's side. "I won't hurt you," she thought, willing the Mustang to understand. Gradually, she lowered the cloth and began to wipe away the crusted snow and stubborn dirt from Aurora's matted coat. Though the horse flinched at first, it did not pull away. Just then, Mary entered, carrying a steaming pot of broth. She offered a faint smile at the sight of Clara tending so tenderly to Aurora. "She's letting you touch her," Mary said softly, kneeling beside her husband. "That's a good sign." Clara felt a small swell of pride within her, but kept it hidden as she focused on the slow, circular motions of the cloth. Her green eyes remained fixed on the task at hand. Although Aurora's coat appeared dull and matted, Clara could vividly imagine how radiant it might look beneath the layers of dirt. In her mind's eye, she saw Aurora running freely across the vast plains, her chestnut coat gleaming in the brilliant sunlight, a vision that filled Clara with a deep, unyielding determination. The first few days proved to be a true test of patience. Aurora initially refused food, her body too weak and her spirit too frightened to trust the nourishment offered. Mary carefully mixed fragrant herbs into a cup of warm water, coaxing Aurora to take gentle sips as the Mustang's thirst battled with her lingering pain. Nearby, Clara remained ever present, her silent, steady presence a reassurance as she stayed with Aurora long after her parents had left the barn. In a quiet, unspoken language, Clara whispered words only her gentle gestures could convey, her movements slow, deliberate, and laden with unexpressed empathy. One radiant afternoon, as the heavy snow began to yield to a rare burst of sunshine, Clara sat by Aurora with a handful of carrots she had spent the morning meticulously carving into smaller, manageable pieces for the ailing horse. Holding one out with both steadiness and hope, Clara watched intently as Aurora sniffed the air. Her nostrils flared while she stretched her neck slightly, ears flicking toward the small girl. After a moment's hesitation, the Mustang accepted the carrot with a delicate tug from Clara's hand, chewing slowly. At that instant, Clara's heart swelled with quiet triumph, a small victory that felt monumental. With a soft smile, she silently signed, "Good girl, you're safe now." The more time Clara spent with Aurora, the more she began to see herself reflected in the Mustang. Every sudden movement that made Aurora flinch reminded Clara of her own reserved nature around strangers, and the mistrust in the Mustang's eyes echoed the deep unease Clara often felt in a world that misunderstood her. Yet, there was something else too, a strength born from Aurora's resilience, her unwavering refusal to give up, which reminded Clara that she was not alone in her struggles. One serene evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the barn in soft gold, Clara rested her forehead against Aurora's warm neck. The Mustang had grown steadier. She now stood for longer moments, her legs firmer with each passing day. Closing her eyes, Clara absorbed the comforting warmth of Aurora's body and thought, "You're strong. You've endured so much, yet here you still are, just as I am." Aurora shifted her head, brushing it tenderly against Clara's shoulder, a small gesture that felt like a silent promise of shared courage. With the slow arrival of spring, the Colorado Rockies began to awaken. The once frozen ground softened, giving way to tender shoots of green, and the harsh winds of winter mellowed into cool, gentle breezes. For the Turner family, the change in season brought both relief and a bittersweet inevitability. Aurora was recovering beautifully, her coat now glistening with renewed health, her previously weakened legs firm and steady, and the wild spark in her eyes, dimmed by exhaustion, now shone brighter than ever. Clara sat on the edge of the paddock, legs dangling over the worn wooden fence, watching Aurora trot around the enclosure. The Mustang's mane rippled like flames in the afternoon sunlight, each confident, fluid step a testament to the progress they had made together. Yet, as much as Clara longed to hold on to Aurora, she knew deep down that the choice was not hers to make. Aurora belonged to the wild, and the time had come to let her go. Tom approached with his boots crunching softly against the gravel, leaning on the fence beside Clara. With a thoughtful expression and a gentle tone, he said, "We have done everything we can for her." Clara nodded silently, clutching the edge of the fence and keeping her eyes fixed on Aurora. "I know," she signed, her movements slow and deliberate, "but it feels as if she is leaving me too." Tom rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "She's not really leaving you, Clara," he murmured softly. "You have given her a second chance, and that means you will always be a part of her story." That evening, the family spent precious moments preparing for Aurora's release. Clara, with tender care, brushed the Mustang's coat one last time, her fingers lingering over the patches of fur that had grown back over old scars. Aurora stood motionless, her dark eyes calm yet watchful, as Clara wondered if the horse could sense the impending farewell and feel the weight of goodbye in the air. Clara huddled beneath the shelter of a fallen tree, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The night had turned bitterly cold, her breath forming soft, white clouds in the moonlight. She tried to stay calm, but the distant howls of wolves sent a shiver through her bones. The forest felt endless, its shadows creeping closer with every passing minute. "You have to stay strong," she told herself, gripping a small branch she had picked up as a walking stick. "Aurora wouldn't give up, and neither can you." The thought of Aurora filled her with a fragile sense of hope. She imagined the Mustang running wild, her mane streaming like fire. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to be brave. But as the hours dragged on, exhaustion set in. Her body ached from the cold, her mind drifting between wakefulness and dreams. Then, at dawn, the world slowly stirred back to life. The first rays of sunlight spilled over the mountains, illuminating the dense canopy and casting long shadows across the forest floor. Clara stirred, her limbs stiff and aching. Blinking against the brightness, she sat up, then froze. A sound reached her ears. A rhythmic thud. Hoofbeats. Her heart pounded as she turned toward the sound. And there, stepping through the dappled morning light, was a familiar figure. Aurora. The Mustang's chestnut coat gleamed in the sunlight, her mane rippling with every graceful step. Clara's breath caught as she scrambled to her feet, green eyes wide with disbelief. Aurora stopped a few feet away, her dark eyes steady and calm. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the forest holding its breath around them. Clara reached out, her fingers trembling. Aurora stepped forward, lowering her head until her warm breath brushed against Clara's hand. "You came back," Clara whispered, her voice raw with emotion. Aurora nudged her shoulder gently, then turned her head toward the trees. Clara followed her gaze. The Mustang wasn't just here to find her. She was guiding her home. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the search party had returned, their spirits heavy with exhaustion. Tom and Mary stood by the fence, eyes scanning the horizon. The sheriff's car idled nearby, its radio crackling faintly. "We'll try again," the sheriff said. We won't give up. Just as the words left his mouth, a figure appeared on the horizon. At first, it was just a shadow in the morning light. But as it moved closer, reality sank in. Clara. Mary's cry was a mix of joy and disbelief as she ran toward her daughter. Tom followed, his steps quick and unsteady. Clara's knees buckled as she reached them, and her parents wrapped her in a tight embrace. "You're okay," Tom whispered, his voice breaking. You're okay. Clara nodded weakly and glanced at Aurora. With trembling hands, she signed, "She saved me." Aurora stood still, her dark eyes watching the reunion. She snorted softly, tossing her head, as if to say, "I was always watching over her." Later that morning, the Turner family sat quietly around the dining table. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the crackling fire. Outside, sunlight poured over the Rockies, painting the snow-capped peaks in soft shades of gold and pink. But inside the cabin, the weight of Clara's disappearance, and Aurora's miraculous return, still lingered. Clara sat with her hands resting in her lap, her green eyes distant. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about Aurora since she'd watched the Mustang vanish into the trees. The warmth of her breath, the steady rhythm of her hoofbeats, the quiet certainty in her gaze, it all replayed in Clara's mind like a dream. Tom cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "I still can't believe it," he muttered. A wild Mustang showing up in the middle of nowhere. "Leading you back to camp?" Mary set down her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "It's more than that," she said. Aurora didn't just find Clara. She came back for her. Clara's cheeks flushed slightly, but she didn't look up. Instead, she reached for the small chalkboard beside her plate and began writing. When she held it up, the words were simple, yet powerful. "She remembered me." Tom leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "I don't know much about wild horses," he admitted, "but I do know this. They don't just trust people for no reason." "You must have meant something to her, Clara." Clara nodded slowly, gripping the chalkboard tighter. Aurora had saved her, and she would never forget it. Later that day, Clara wandered out to the paddock, her boots crunching softly against the frosted grass. The ranch felt quieter now. The absence of Aurora was sharp, like an ache she couldn't quite shake. Leaning against the fence, Clara let her mind drift, imagining Aurora running free across the plains. "Are you safe?" she wondered. "Do you know how much you've changed my life?" Footsteps approached from behind. She turned to see Mary, her woolen coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Thought I'd find you here," her mother said with a faint smile. Clara shrugged, gesturing toward the paddock. "I miss her." Mary stepped closer, resting her arms on the fence. "I know you do," she said gently. But think about what she gave you. She didn't just save your life, Clara. She showed you how strong you are. Asterisk. Clara looked down, running her fingers over the rough wood of the fence. Her mother's words stirred something deep inside her, a quiet pride she hadn't felt before. Mary reached over, tucking a strand of Clara's hair behind her ear. "And you gave her something too," she said. Asterisk. She came back because she knew you'd never given up on her. Asterisk. Clara's lips parted in a small, silent smile. The bond they shared, it wasn't just chance. It was something deeper, something unbreakable. And no matter how far Aurora ran, Clara knew in her heart, she would always find her way back. A gentle smile played on Clara's lips as her mother's comforting words settled over her like a warm blanket, wrapping her in a soothing embrace. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the Mustang that had changed everything. In the following days, as the storm's memory faded, the Turner family gradually fell back into their familiar routines. Yet for Clara, something profound had shifted inside. She began spending more time outdoors, exploring the winding trails around the ranch and capturing the wild landscapes in her well-worn notebook. With each sketch, her once reticent movements gained purpose, and a quiet confidence blossomed within her. One serene evening, as the sun dipped low over the Rockies and bathed the world in a soft golden glow, Clara sat by the window of her room. Her sketchbook lay open on her lap, its pages filled with countless drawings of Aurora, the Mustang she had come to cherish since their farewell. Every line, every graceful curve of Aurora's form, spoke of freedom and the fierce beauty of the wild. Her dark, soulful eyes, her flowing mane like liquid fire, and the proud stance captured on paper were not just images but heartfelt tributes that kept the memory of Aurora alive in Clara's heart. At that moment, a gentle knock on the door broke the quiet reverie. Her father, Tom, entered with a playful glimmer in his eyes, holding something hidden behind his back. "Got a surprise for you," he teased warmly. Curious, Clara tilted her head as Tom stepped forward and revealed a framed photograph. It was the very picture he had taken on the day they released Aurora, a perfect capture of the Mustang galloping into the wild. The morning sunlight had caught her just right, illuminating her chestnut coat and the graceful flow of her mane, epitomizing the very essence of freedom. Clara's breath hitched as she carefully took the frame in her hands. Her fingers traced the cool glass, following the silhouette of Aurora captured within. Looking up at her father, her green eyes shone with deep gratitude. "I thought you might want to keep her close," Tom said softly, his voice gentle and filled with affection. Clara nodded in silent agreement, quickly signing a heartfelt thank you with trembling hands, a simple message that carried all the weight of her emotions. Tom smiled, ruffling her hair in a tender gesture before quietly stepping out of the room. Clara then placed the framed photo on her bedside table, positioning it so that its warm, moonlit glow would be visible from anywhere in the room. As the night deepened, she climbed into bed, and the soft radiance of the moon bathed Aurora's image in a gentle light. With a peaceful smile touching her lips, Clara closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet darkness, "Good night, Aurora," as if sending her off with a promise of enduring connection. "I wanted to come thank you in person and to ask for your help," the visitor said softly. Clara's eyes widened in surprise as she gestured first toward Miss Carter and then to herself, her expression questioning as if silently asking how she could possibly help. Mary placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder while Miss Carter nodded in solemn understanding. "Wild Mustangs are under threat," Miss Carter explained, her tone earnest. "Their numbers dwindle, and they face dangers, habitat loss, illegal capture, and your story, what you did for Aurora, is nothing short of inspiring. If you're willing, I would like to share it with others. It could make a real difference." A month later, Clara found herself standing in front of a small but attentive crowd at the local community center. Posters of wild Mustangs adorned the walls, their images capturing the spirit and beauty of the creatures she had come to love so deeply. Glancing at her parents seated in the front row, their faces filled with encouragement, Clara felt her heart flutter. Miss Carter introduced her, speaking passionately about the challenges Mustangs faced and the critical importance of protecting them. Then, with a warm and reassuring nod toward Clara, she stepped back and allowed her to take the stage. Clutching her chalkboard tightly in her hands, Clara had prepared a series of messages to tell her story. Taking a deep breath, she began slowly. One by one, she held up her carefully crafted messages. She described finding Aurora in the relentless snow, her brave decision to rescue the Mustang from near death, and the long, tender days spent nursing her back to health. Clara explained the powerful bond they had forged, how Aurora had returned when she was lost, and the heart-wrenching choice to release her back into the wild. The room fell into a profound silence as Clara's soft, trembling voice recounted every detail. When she finished, the audience erupted into heartfelt applause, their appreciation filling the space with warmth and hope. After the event, many people approached Clara, thanking her for her courage and compassion, and some even shared their own experiences with wild horses. Others, moved by her story, asked how they could help. Miss Carter beamed with excitement. "You've done something incredible today, Clara," she said. "Aurora's story will inspire so many people." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with pride for the first time. In that moment, she realized that her silence was no longer a barrier. She had found a way to communicate something powerful, something that could change the way people saw the world. That evening, Clara and her parents returned to the Turner Ranch under a sky strewn with countless stars. The air was cool and quiet. The only sounds were the distant rustle of leaves and the soft hum of nighttime insects. Alone in the paddock, Clara climbed onto the wooden fence, her eyes fixed on the horizon as memories of Aurora flooded her mind. She recalled the Mustang's gentle breath, the steady rhythm of her hoofbeats, and the unspoken promise in her dark, soulful eyes. Opening her sketchbook to a blank page, Clara began to draw with quiet determination. This time, she didn't just sketch Aurora. She drew an entire herd of Mustangs running together, their power and beauty leaping off the page. When she finished, she held the drawing close, a soft smile spreading across her face as she whispered, "This is for you, Aurora, and for every Mustang like you." The Colorado Rockies stretched endlessly before her as she perched atop the ridge near the Turner Ranch. The late afternoon sun bathed the land in a golden glow, and wildflowers swayed gently in the soft breeze. Though it had been months since she last saw Aurora, the Mustang's presence remained vivid in her heart. Every time Clara gazed upon the vast wilderness, she imagined Aurora galloping freely across the plains, her mane flowing like fire. With a tender sigh, Clara lifted her sketchbook, her fingers tracing the lines of her drawing. In that moment, she felt a deep, unbroken connection with the wild, one that transcended time and distance. Just as dusk settled, voices of friends and neighbors echoed from the community center, sharing the impact of her story. Inspired by the evening's success and the powerful messages she had conveyed, Clara realized that her journey was far from over. Her story, and that of Aurora, would live on in the hearts of those who believed in the wild, in freedom, and in the enduring power of compassion. Call to action *. If Aurora's journey has touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Thunder Hoofbeats. Your support helps us spread these inspiring stories of courage and resilience. Leave a comment below telling us what Aurora's story means to you, and join us as we continue to celebrate the wild spirit of our magnificent Mustangs.